What is up, you guys? My name is Shelby. Welcome back to my channel, and today we will be asking, will coronavirus die out in the summer? But first, thank you so much to our sponsor, Private Pews, a local craft beer brewed by my good friend Richard Hardman. And without further ado, let's pop one open. Oh God. And get into it. A question that I get asked a lot is, will the coronavirus die out in the summer? Now, this is not a bad question, considering that a lot of respiratory viruses have decreased transmission in the summer. And McKinnon et al., for example, showed in 2009 that there's a strong correlation between having low humidity and cold exposure and increased respiratory tract infections. And so this prompts a lot of questions about the relationship between temperature, humidity, and their effect on the transmission of the coronavirus. So our first paper is the effect of temperature and relative humidity on viability of the SARS coronavirus. The first author in this paper is K.H. Chan, and it was published actually October 1st, 2011. So nearly a decade before the outbreak of the novel SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. In my last video, I talked about the different methods of transmission for the coronavirus. One was indirect or direct contact, the second was respiratory droplets, and the third was fine particle aerosols. This study in particular deals with indirect contact. So what happens when a person contaminates a surface and then it is picked up by another individual who then becomes infected. And while a virus is sitting on a surface, you can imagine that the longer it can sit and remain viable on that surface, the increased chances of it being transmitted to another individual. And so in essence, this study is trying to test the effect of humidity and temperature conditions on the survival of that virus on a dry surface. To begin this study, they isolated the SARS-CoV virus and then created a stock virus. This means that we know the concentration of the virus within that sample, and we can evenly divide it into wells so we know how much virus is present in each of the wells. And then we let the virus dry out. So we're simulating what it would be like if someone were to cough on a surface and then the virus would dry out on that surface. So in the wells, the virus is dried out, and then at particular time points, we're able to redilute and quantify the amount of virus in each well. And in general, you would expect that over time, the virus will reduce in quantity as it dies out. And you can imagine that if you have a plate of this with time points on it, you could do this in different temperature and different humidity conditions over and over again to see if there's any significant differences between those conditions. On to our first graph. Here we are looking at the effect of different temperatures on the infectivity of the SARS coronavirus. So you have your x-axis, which is time, and then you have your y-axis, which is viral titer reduction. And that's a fancy way of saying the amount of virus in the sample. So really what we're looking at is, once the virus was allowed to dry out, how much of the virus is still present in the sample as time goes by. And looking at this graph, we can see that there is three different temperatures. There was the 104 degrees Fahrenheit plates, there was the 91.4 degrees Fahrenheit plates, and then there was the 82.4 degree Fahrenheit plates. So there is a significant difference between the 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit plates and then all the ones below that. And that would indicate that the temperature being that high had an effect on how long the virus was able to survive in the plate. And they wanted to make a really interesting point after this. So the graph we saw before was actually done at a relative humidity of greater than 95%. And then the second graph, the same experiment, but done at a relative humidity of 80 to 89%. So there is no significant difference between the three temperatures in your second graph, but there is in the first. And this would indicate that temperature can significantly reduce the coronavirus survival, but only at higher humidities. This graph right here is the infectivity of the SARS coronavirus at different humidities rather than temperature. So your x-axis is still time, and then your y-axis is still your viral titer reduction. But now your dark purple line is relative humidity greater than 95%, and your pink line is a relative humidity from 80 to 85%. And when you format the information in this way, you can identify a different pattern. So at 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, there is a significant difference between a 95% relative humidity and an 80 to 85% relative humidity. The difference in humidity between these two conditions affects the virus's survival. However, if you look at the other two graphs, at low temperature conditions, there is not a significant difference in virus survival between the two humidities. So in general, the graphs show us that humidity can significantly reduce virus survival, but it must occur at higher temperatures. So the big conclusions of this paper. The first was actually that the SARS-CoV virus is stable when transmitted through contaminated surfaces. And that's really alarming because in an air-conditioned environment, it can survive for up to 2 weeks after drying. And so in order to achieve the inactivation of the SARS-CoV virus, you have to have high temperature and high humidity in combination. And right now in Cincinnati, it is approximately 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and we only have about 40% relative humidity, and that just is not going to cut it. And always the skeptic, there's some issues with this study. The first being they dealt with the SARS-CoV virus, but not the SARS-CoV-2 virus that we are currently dealing with. And it only looked at indirect transmission of the virus, while we know that there's respiratory droplets and fine particle aerosols that also contribute to the transmission. And briefly, I wanted to put up a list of all the possible ways that temperature could affect the transmission of the coronavirus. So the first would be a repressed immune function, changes to the respiratory tract, including repressed ciliary movement. SARS-CoV is sensitive to heat and may have a lower survival at higher temperatures, but then we also have to count for things like indoor crowding and poor ventilation, and then the reduction in lung function that usually occurs at colder temperatures. And then we can think about all the possible effects that humidity has on transmission. So if it's less humid, there's evidence that you would have damage to your respiratory lining or reduced clearance of respiratory mucus, and that would increase your risk of getting a respiratory tract infection. And then if it's more humid, you have more rapid settling of exhaled respiratory drops. In a more humid environment, you could say that the respiratory droplets will have a higher density and will actually settle on the ground faster. And that could reduce transmission greatly. All right, you guys. So in conclusion, this study showed that synergistically, temperature and humidity can decrease the transmission of the coronavirus, but they have to work together. I want to be clear though, the coronavirus will never die out because it is a seasonal respiratory disease. So they can decrease in transmission, but they will never totally go away. And you can be hopeful, but you always have to be realistic. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.